And move this down a little bit. All right. So how's everybody doing today? And all right. So yeah, it's been a rough weekend. I like to say happy Halloween to all the witches and goons and goblins and monsters and vampires and everything. And it was a nice full moon last night, and it was bright. I felt the energy, and so anyway, still working on this project. So I have another installment of NA AA 12-step recovery, and the title of this is "The Journey from Darkness to Light." The journey from darkness to light. And so now, I was listening to some of my videos, man, and my vocabulary is off the hook. You know, so I made a conscious decision to work on my vocabulary. That's right. I said, look, I'm working. That's all I can tell y'all is I'm working and to hang in there with me. So we're gonna move on to start this thing off. Now let me say this right. What I'm doing with this commentary that I'm doing, and I'm study developing it as it goes. You know, as I go along, is to talk about my journey through recovery and where I am today. And should you identify with some of the stuff I'm saying, I mean, that's good. That's fine. Identify with it. You know, if you could use it, use it. If you can't, hold on to it. You know what I'm saying? Put it in the medicine cabinet somewhere. So anyway, moving on with the topic. Now, let me say this also. This is a compilation of all the material that I've put out so far. Like I said, like I just stated, I'm evolving in this process because I'm going somewhere with it. And in my life, through the recovery process, it has taken me places spiritually, mentally, physically, and emotionally. I'm evolving, and I'm going somewhere with this. So this show or commentary or YouTube video that I'm doing, most important is for me. In my attempt to get everything I have out inside of me, hopefully it'll benefit somebody else inside the recovery process, and then take on some new or take myself to a new level and a new phase in my recovery. I've been in recovery some 34 years, 5-6 months, and some change. I started off in Alcoholics Anonymous, and then I moved on to fellowship. So I started off in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's where I got introduced to the steps in actually January of 1986. And from there, I maintained that fellowship till I moved to Detroit in 1987. And in 1987, I was a part of the Detroit NA community up until 15 years ago, going on 16 years ago in January, till I moved here to Indianapolis, and that's where I'm at now. And I've been a part of the NA fellowship. However, I must say this. Although fellowships are different because they have their own jargon, they have their own way of thought, their own philosophy on how they look look at things, the 12 steps basically are the same. There's no difference basically of the 12 steps in AA than it is in NA. None whatsoever. The steps may have a word or two missing, but that doesn't, from my experience, the fourth step is the fourth step. The first step is the first step. The second step is the second step. The 12th step is the second step. Only thing that may be missing as far as AA 12 step is where the we's are applied. And for simplicity, when I talk about the we as far as step work is concerned, I mean mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And how I would define those on the mental aspect for right now, it would be the mental, your intellect, the intellect or your intelligence. When I define emotional, when I say emotional, what I'm talking about is your devotional, how you're devoted to something. When I talk about the physical, it is the physical, it's your physical body, or it might be a physical thing. When I talk about spiritual, it's energy, for simplicity. So while I'm referring to in all my talks or commentaries or lectures, or whatever it is you want to, that individual want to call it, these, on those 4 levels, this is what I mean. And I have a reason for that. And then as I go through my material, it'll make some sense. Matter of fact, it's going to make a whole lot of sense. And part of it is why, is because on the spiritual plane, a lot of times, people that are involved in some type of a dogma like religion, or when they're involved in some type of like religion or philosophy, and they'll think spiritual, mentally they'll go towards some type of religious dogma or philosophical dogma. And when I said mentally, intellectually, that's where their intellect will go. However, this is not that. Why? Because the programs, all spiritual programs, are geared to accommodate what? Who? The atheist and the agnostic. The atheist and the agnostic who have a seat at the table in all recovery programs. They don't have to be religious. No, it says that in various programs, literature. You ain't got to be religious. I ain't got to, be a Muslim or a Christian or Jewish, or a Zionist or a Buddhist or Hindu to get this program, because the program tailors itself to the individual. So moving on with that, and I don't want to spend a lot of time with that, but I did want to take time and make that clear on the mental, physical, spiritual, and the emotional front. So moving on with this, I'm going to start off with so what I did was, let me get back. I got my train of thought back. So what I'm doing is, on all of the shows that I've done before this, hopefully, if things go right, this will be a compilation of all of them based on, like I said, where I'm going personally. In other words, I'm trying to get everything out of me, open my cup up, because I believe, and I sure have, entered a whole new level and phase of recovery. So what I'm doing is clearing myself. And when I say clearing, I'm clearing what I have in, what I have inside on those 4 levels, and I'm getting them out so I can get some new information. I don't want to call it stuff, because what I've embarked on is my energy level has gone to another level. My spiritual side has gone to another level, and mentally, I'm focusing on intellectually on another level, and emotionally, I'm going to another level. So physically, definitely going to another level. Guess what? I'm getting older. 66 years old, y'all. So anyway, so moving on with this stuff, this is the purpose for this. Now, if anybody's getting anything out of it, and which I hope, fine. So I'm gonna move on, because I don't want to be up till past my bedtime, and I got to go to work. And I spent all weekend, excuse me, working on this information that I'm about to put out, and so bear with me. So, like I said, my topic is for right now is AA, NA 12-step recovery, the journey from darkness to light. Now, where addiction and alcoholism, from a recovery perspective, makes up the darkness, or is the darkness, and I ain't gonna say make up, it is the darkness, there are certain events that take place. And so I'm gonna give some definitions of addiction and alcoholism. And starting off with addiction. Addiction, there are 2 things that make up addiction. It's 2 things: obsessive and compulsion, or obsession and compulsion. And obsession is a fixed idea that takes us time and time again to our particular drug or some substitute. It says it takes us time and time again back to our particular drug or some substitute. To recapture the ease that we once knew. Now notice it says to capture the ease, that we once knew. So let's move on, because we're gonna deal with that. Because a lot of times when people think of addicts or and alcoholics, they just think of their symptoms. You know, they'll think of the drug or the drugs that are being taken, or they'll just think of the drinking, right? But notice inside this definition, it says some substitute, or it talks about, it says to our particular drug or some substitute. Now, that means that after that drug is let go or that alcohol is let go, something is going to come and creep into its place, or there's going to be a void, and then something's going to come in and fulfill that void. Now, it could be gambling, it could be promiscuous sexual activity, it could be overeating, it could be gambling, and man, I let me find out that little list I created, because I created and I got some notes too. And it could be like, let me find that page, because I got some material. It could be drama. You know, people can become addicted to drama and excitement. They could become workaholics. They could become, check this out, addiction to prostitution. So your prostitutes, and understand, a prostitute don't always have to be a woman. You know, men are prostitutes too. So they could become addicted to prostitution, overeating, to include binging and purging. And I also put in the lifestyle of addiction and alcoholism. People can be, you know, like the bar scenes, the or drug houses, being around that type of people. And also, check this out, the selling of drugs, because selling the drugs is a part of the lifestyle. So drug dealers and drug distributors, you know, it's people that like to be around those type of personalities. They can become like rock stars, celebrities in the neighborhood. You know, I've been around Bam Bam. You know, Bam Bam. You know, he might have a couple, you know, like Mercedes and Cadillacs and the men and the women, you know, and so forth. So moving back on to my little definitions here. Let's flip back up to my notes, because I'm gonna work through this, because hopefully I would get over this. I would get this information out tonight. So I talked about the compulsion, and I talked about the obsession. So going into compulsion, and inside of compulsion is one having started the process with one pill, one fix, one drink, one spoonful, one game of chance, to include numbers, to include risky ventures. Risky ventures. And a risky venture is something that sounds good. It sounds good, right? Like somebody might come and tell you, they say, hey, you know, if you give me $50, I can get you 20 shares of AT&T stock. And you give them $20 for 50 shares of AT&T stock. But what they didn't tell you, or what they might have told you, that the condition of that stock being worth what it is that AT&T might have to go bankrupt. And what's the chance of that happening? I would say not the chance. AT&T most likely ain't gonna go bankrupt. They gonna do some other stuff, you know. So anyway, moving on. It says, like I said, once having started the process with one fixed pill, drink, spoonful, game of chance, sexual behavior, to include prostitution and promiscuous sex, says we cannot stop through our own power of will because of our spiritual sensitivity to the drug. And it says we. And remember, I said I was counting the we as mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. And it says of our own will. And the will makes up also those four elements. The human will makes that up. Mental, physical, spiritual, and emotion. And it says because of our sensitivity to drugs and alcohol, we are completely in the grip of a destructive power greater than ourselves. Now, it says alcohol, but I'm also going to put drugs. I'm also going to put food. I'm also going to put gambling. I'm also going to put promiscuous sexual behavior and any other the symptoms, because these are the symptoms of the disease of addiction. They're the physical symptoms, where obsessive and compulsion will lie more close to the mental part of of the addiction. And then going down to the alcoholism is a person's whose life is controlled by alcohol. Very simple. Where alcohol is the primary symptom. Their life is controlled by alcohol. And that's not to say like they won't like smoke some marijuana or pop a pill or something like that. But their primary symptom is the alcohol. That's what an alcoholic is, you know. And so moving on up, like George says, to the east side. Cause I got a lot of work. I've spent all weekend working on this stuff. And it says, it says where a person whose life is controlled by the use of alcohol, where alcohol is the primary symptom of the lifestyle and obsession and compulsive behavior composed of the ism. Now, inside of alcohol, if you notice, people will say alcoholic, that's the person. And then inside of alcoholism is what the alcoholic practice. They practice alcoholism, suggesting that alcohol, that the alcoholic lives a lifestyle. There's a lifestyle where the key component is the alcohol. So going later on, just stay with me. We're going to go into that lifestyle. Now, like addiction, obsession and compulsion are the key. How can I say this? Are the key principles. Just like the alcoholic. I mean, just like the drug. Just like the drug addict or the sex addict, where the gambler, obsession and compulsion is at play also with the alcoholic. And now remember, when I gave the definition of obsession, and I said, once having started the process, and what's the process? The process is alcoholism for the alcoholic. Once having started the process with one fixed pill or drink, spoonful, game of chance, sexual behavior to include prostitution, that means a prostitute. Let me be plain and clear. Not a person to include a person that's selling their body for drugs, for alcohol, to get money for a game of chance, what have you, but also for the prostitute. Because prostitution, although it is promiscuous sexual activity, can be very addictive. Some of us know that, right? But if it don't apply, just let that go ahead and just, let that apply, let that fly. Because a lot of people are not forced into prostitution after a while. Some are. I believe that. Some are. But everyone is not. So moving on with the alcoholism. Now, like I said, inside of the alcoholism, there's a lifestyle. That's what the ISM suggests. There's a lifestyle. So at this point, and let me get my drink out, bump on the floor. Let me shake it up. Right there. And I hope it's not too hot. I got some tea going on. Because this is going to be some work right here. Yeah. I got a drink right there. That is a drink. I ain't going to tell y'all what it is. Now, so moving on. Let me add on too. People don't just wake up and say, I'm going to be a drug addict, or I'm going to be an alcoholic, or I'm going to overeat my life away. I'm just going to gain, I'm going to be 5'5", and I'm going to gain 300 pounds and have to get around and hover around and have health issues connected to being overweight, obesity, or becoming like a diabetic, not able to manage my own life, or a person that's gambling. Something happened, and I'm saying not in every case, but in most cases when it comes to 12-step recovery. Not in every case, but in most cases when it comes to 12-step recovery. And what has happened in most cases, from my experience and from what I've heard, attending meetings over the last 30 years and certain articles that I have read, right? What has happened is a person have experienced some type of a trauma. Trauma, at some point, an individual have suffered. And as a result of the trauma, it took their lives into a tailspin. That their lives went into a tailspin. And I was testing my camera because I got 3 cameras up, right? So I'm going to be going from camera to camera to camera every now and then. So I'm on my other camera. And like I said, and I'm going to be adjusting it too. So what has happened is that an individual have suffered some type of a trauma. So what is trauma? Say, Suni, what is trauma? Now there's 3 levels of trauma. There's acute trauma, chronic trauma, and there is complex trauma. And inside of acute trauma, at this level of trauma occurs when an individual has experienced a single stressful or dangerous event in their life. They have experienced a single stressful or dangerous event. Just one thing could have happened. They could experience, they could have witnessed a death. They could have been in some type of accident. They could have experienced bankruptcy, like pennilessness or homelessness. But it was like one event, and it turned their life around. They could have experienced a violent situation, and it turned their life around. The next one is chronic trauma. Chronic trauma occurs when repeated and prolonged to a highly stressful or dangerous event. So it's acute trauma, but it's repeated. But it's one event over and over again. A hostility at work, a hostile workplace, hostile environment. It could be inside of a relationship. What's another good one? It could have been homelessness. How about that? Not being able to take care of yourself. And then the last one is complex trauma, which results from multiple traumatic events. In other words, a highly stressful or dangerous event, but not one, 2, or more, where a person could be inside of a wartime situation and they're experiencing the wartime environment day after day after day. How about a person that's in an abusive relationship or a bullying relationship that they're living, and then they turn around and have a car accident and they're injured. Then they turn around and they lose a loved one or a friend. Then they turn around and they lose their job, their means of supporting themselves. So that's four different acts of trauma all at one time. That's complex trauma. In other words, a person that's going through some hell. They catch a little hell right now. And that's not funny because I've been there. I have been there recently. Yeah. And so what happens is inside the loss of the inside the traumatic event, a person suffers pain on all four levels. It hurts them on all four levels: mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. There's a physical result. And like I said, mentally, they suffer intellectually. Inside the devotional is their emotional. They emotionally, they're not as committed for right now, just for right now. Or their commitment has been filtered with this event. They will have actually think of well, no, that's more on the intellectual where they start thinking of stuff. But let's just say their devotion, they're not, they're devoted or not as devoted to something. Spiritually, their energy is affected. They may not have enough energy. I can't do this no more. I can't live like this no more. Their drive has been affected, and it's seen on the physical front. All right, so where I talked about domestic violence, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give some other examples, make it plain and simple. So in other examples, being fired from employment, I said that, or loss of a business, domestic violence, rape, molestation, being shot, mugging, burglary, bullying, sexual assault, I said that, or physical abuse, a natural disaster. Yeah, remember what happened in what was that? The name of that state where they had all that water come in, Texas. Yeah, Texas. Hurricanes, tornadoes. Fire, car accident, war, life-threatening injuries. Now, after stress, there's another thing, and there's another level, and it's called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which occurs to an individual as a youth. That means like if you was young, you were growing up, and you experienced some of the things that I just mentioned as a youth. You experienced some of the things that I just mentioned as a youth, and then you grow up and you develop certain type of disorders, certain type of disorders which affects the individual mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And as a result of all the stresses, of all the levels of trauma, including PTSD, what develops is resentment, anger, and fear. Resentment, anger, and fear. And inside of the resentment, for example, for the purpose of recovery, although there's many definitions for resentment, I'm going to say resentment in this case, until I, change the definition, would be living a past anger. Reliving a past anger as if it happened today. And for an estimated time period of the past, I'm going to say from 90 days prior. Anything prior from 90 days. And I say around. I ain't going to say like just count, 3 months back. No, I'll say around, like right around 90 days. But definitely anything prior to. So if you reliving a past anger, reliving it in your mind, it's a mental thing, and you reliving it like it happened, like 3 months ago or something like that, like it happened today, you are actually living a resentment. That's what a resentment is. And anger is something that happened right now in the present. You mad at something right now in the present, and you have not gotten any resolve from it. It's like, okay, same as resentment. You ain't got no resolve. You mad because of something what happened to you anywhere between around July, whatever, all the way to 1964. Your ass still mad. Yeah, that's resentment. And fear. And fear, inside of fear, is exactly what it is. A person is fearful. They have and I'm gonna see if I could kind of like bring that up a little bit. Let me see if I can bring up fear a little bit. See what Google got to say about fear. Because I got 3 screens up, so I'm trying to test my okay, fear. The definition of fear. And it says fear, a feeling of distress, apprehension, or alarm caused by impending danger, pain, etc. It says concern and anxiety, to be afraid. So I'll just go with a simple definition of a feeling of distress, apprehension, or alarm caused by impending danger, pain, etc. Now remember I said when I talked about I got allergies, so if you see me picking at my nose and that's my allergies, man. Plus we got cats in the house too. My wife got these cats, so she got a couple animals. She got a dog, me. Then we got some cats. Then we got 2 other puppies upstairs. We got some boys. So all this animal. Then we got her. And she's a woman. Don't hit me, baby. But anyway. So moving on. Let me drink some more of my tea right quick, man, because I'm going to try to get through this stuff in the next 20 minutes. And so anyway, moving on. On the PTSD tip, and I talked about the fear. So I talked about resentment, anger, and fear. and what that and what and let me something popped up on my screen. Let me close that out. So anyway, when talking about the makeup of addiction and alcoholism, the obsessive and the compulsive behavior, what nurtures that? We what's nurturing to obsessive and compulsive behavior or the darkness is the trauma. In other words, addiction and alcoholism spawns from something. It comes from something. And I said usually in a person's life it's from the trauma. Then I went over the different types of trauma. Certain results, certain behaviors and attitudes that result from the trauma. Now, another thing I want to bring into play is too, as a result of the what happens from the trauma, and I talked about rape, molestation, shooting, and so forth. What happens is there's a pain that's developed inside the person on four levels: mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. There's a pain that sets in, an inner pain, and it could be seen in the physical. And inside the physical, part of the manifestation of the pain is what is the symptoms is the drinking, is the drugs, is the I said drinking, drugs, the gambling, the prostitution, the addiction to excitement. I talked about that. The games of chance and so forth. So these can be seen. I talked about the resentment, the anger, and the fear. And then when I talk about the resentment, anger, and fear, usually results from the different levels of trauma. Now there's some and I gave a definition of fear, and I gave one of resentment. But also what I want to say about resentment is having a bitter indignation at having been treated unfairly, reliving a past anger over and over again in one's mind as if it happened today. And then I talked about what past was, and I said past approximately or right around 3 months and prior. And we have people that live that type of behavior. So moving on. And then I said anger, a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, and hostility. And then inside of fear, and I gave that definition that I had got off of the computer. But also I want to add this. An unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. And then, I have some synonyms for all of them. And I do want to go over a few of them because it's kind of important, and we're going to see later on. So, for example, some of the synonyms that I have for resentment is annoyance, antagonism, bitterness, grudge, irritation, rage, self-pity, displeasure, hurt, and eerie, I-R-E, eerie. Then with anger, some of the synonyms I have is fury, annoyance, rage, violence, impatient, antagonism, mad, outrage, guilt, and depression. And for fear, I have angst, A-N-G-S-T, anxiety, dismay, doubt, horror, jitters, suspicion, unease, and dread. Now, as a result of trauma, an individual is affected and afflicted on all three levels of the human makeup: mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, which I have defined. And it says, bringing them into darkness. Now, remember when I talked about, I had mentioned earlier, and I had talked about the darkness, and I said, and I talked about the symptoms. I talked about drinking. I talked about gambling. I talked about promiscuous sexual activity to include prostitution, which is addictive. I talked about gambling. I talked about being addicted to drama, and let me flip over to that page right quick. So I talked about addicted to drama and excitement, workaholics, promiscuous sexual behavior, gambling. I talked about binging and purging, drug addiction. Now, what I want to include and make this plain and clear, when I talk about drug addiction, I'm not only talking about using, I'm talking about selling. Because selling of drugs to some people, not all, is an addiction. Trust me, selling is an addiction. I know some people, man, they started off as drug dealers, man. And when they put the trade down, they had to sell something. I know this one dude, man. I mean, he was making his money. He was out there hustling, making his money. And I'm going to tell you something, right? How you make your money is how you make your money. And the risk that you take is the risk that you take because you know what you're doing, right? So anyway, my man, he was out here selling. And he decided to stop. Well, it wasn't like he just woke up one morning and said, I'm going to stop. He had some convincing things that happened to him. And so what happened was he stopped. And we looked up like 4-5 months later, he had some flowers. He had some flowers. And so we asked him, right, and I ain't gonna mention his name. So he said, well, what's the deal, man? You selling flowers now, what's happening, man? He said, man, what I found out was I was addicted to selling. He said, so if I'm gonna sell something, I'm gonna sell some flowers. And man, I'm gonna tell you, he been selling flowers for like 30 years now. Well, I would say about at least 25. Nah, 30, because I've been around for 34. And me and him got basically the same time. And he was selling flowers. He's selling flowers right now today. And he done retired from one of the automakers, what have you. And he's still selling flowers, man. And when I see him, I buy some flowers from him. I give them to somebody. So anyway, getting back to selling, yeah, is an addiction, and I would say this too, the selling of drugs, in some cases, your corner liquor store, yeah, people at your corner liquor store, they could be, I think, from my experience of some of the things that I've seen from people, especially in Detroit. Those liquor store owners, you know, they will use that liquor to get them to fulfill their sexual desires. That's what I'll say that. That's right. They will, in a heartbeat. You know, all up along Davison and Schoolcraft and Mac and we're at Jefferson. You know, all on the east side, Finkel. You know, we done had, you know, when I was out there as an activist, yeah, that's right. We had to go in there and we would see, you know, yeah, I ain't gonna even talk about that. That's not this forum. But we're gonna talk about that later on. So anyway, selling drugs, selling alcohol, and why? Because it gives a person a sense of power. And it's a false sense of power to me. And the reason why I say it's a false sense of power because, yeah, you know, you have something that somebody wants, and you know that they'll do certain things to get that. So power is an addiction. Yeah. Excuse me. And I should have put that down. Power, and I didn't. So anyway, moving on. So I went into some of my synonyms of resentment, anger, and fear. And I gave the definition and as along with the synonyms. So anyway, I talked about how trauma causes a spiritual pain, a mental pain, and emotional pain, which results in the physical, where the individual will actually seek something to relieve that pain, and that something is a symptom, of the disease of addiction. I'm just trying to see what camera I'm on. Okay, I'm on that camera right there. All right, so and I keep hating to say so, you know, and you know, y'all wouldn't believe how intelligent I am. I got a GED. My wife, she always teased me about that because she got a bachelor's in something. I don't know what it is, psychology or something. She a little smarty. But anyway, moving on, right? Moving on. So the symptom, back to the symptom, these symptoms, and the trauma. So let me talk about trauma a little bit. So what's happening inside the trauma has affected a person on all four levels, and as a result, this pain comes about. Now, the pain that they experience, number one, I'll term as the pain of living. Now, trauma I gave the four levels of trauma to include PTSD. And as a result, you know, a person got their symptoms and they using the symptoms to get by day to day. This is their day-to-day living. So a lot of times, like when you see somebody that's afflicted, oh, that was the word I used. That's afflicted with this disease of addiction and alcoholism. And let me find my page where I use that word afflicted at. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead because I already know. So as a result of a person being afflicted and affected by their trauma, we talked about the drinking and the drugging and the sex and the selling of the drugs and the alcohol and so forth. Now the individual's life is in a tailspin. But a lot of times people, and let me say this also about affliction, these people are actually cursed. They're living a curse through as a result of the trauma. And this doesn't happen to everybody. It happens to some people, but not everybody. So moving on, the person is afflicted. And in their day-to-day life, they turn to their obsessive and compulsive behavior. And they willing to do whatever it is to get through the day, to get another pill, another fix, another drink, or to in the power mode, when they're in their power mode, they want to flex their muscles, to show themselves that they are what? In control. But here's the deal. A person is never in control. Now, moving on, the darkness. And the darkness is what I'm talking about. A person begins to live in darkness. And so, and what I called it bringing on the darkness. And I said where obsessive and compulsive behavior is the key components of addiction and alcoholism, total self-centeredness and self-obsession is the darkness as a result of the overall addiction of alcoholism. In short, what I've just described is the foundation of addiction before the main or the primary physical symptoms are manifested. Yeah. So moving on, inside of alcohol and drug abuse, overeating, obesity, promiscuous sexual behavior, yeah, I talked about all that. Now, what happens is, when we see these people, or from your own experience, and we talk about that, because a lot of times it ain't got to be them. It could be us, right? Like in my case, first it was them, and then it became me. And so what happens is as a result of my primary symptoms or living in your primary symptoms, at some point you get out of control. Yeah, you get out of control. Let me change my camera angle to my favorite one. That's this one right here. So, let me take a breath, man, and gather my thoughts, because now I'm about to go into another level. And like I said, I want to get much of this work as I can. And I've been on here for an hour. How long? Let me see. Nah, not quite. Yeah, about an hour, 56 minutes. So anyway, I want to spend some time talking about the darkness and what the darkness is. And the darkness of alcoholism and addiction, and the curse behind it, is the principles that the individual live by. Is they're living out of resentment, anger, and fear. Those are the central symptoms. But what comes along with that is the lying, the manipulation, the distrust of others, the distrust of self, the living in denial. And when I say denial, what is connected to that is deceitfulness and lying. Their inability to see life or reality for what it is. That's a part of the curse. And the reason why I call that a part of the curse is because anytime an individual can't see a situation in reality and where they're lying to themselves, and the only person that they're lying to is them, and the only person that they're deceiving is them, they're cursed. They're cursed. It's just plain and simple. No other way to put that. And what they will use is their primary symptom, whether it's food, whether it's sex, gambling, drinking, excitement, anything that's going to change their way of thinking, that they and to be responsible for their own lifestyle, their own life. So anything that'll help them do that, in my mind, you're in a curse. As a result of your trauma. Now, notice this, right? Have anybody ever noticed this? Is when a person wants you to think a certain way or wants you to do a certain thing, one of the methods that they'll do is they'll use, and I just said one, it's not the only, they will actually threaten you. Well, if you don't do this, this is going to happen. Or they will try to put you in a situation to make you feel like you owe them, you owe me. If it wasn't for me, you would da-da-da-da-da. And the individual go for it. Yeah, so in order to manipulate, and manipulation is a part of the darkness, is to cause or make an individual to feel or think a certain way, a certain type of mind control. Yeah. So moving on. Living a life of darkness, you're living in basically a lie and an illusion. And that's a part of the disease of alcoholism. That's a key component of alcoholism. That's a key component of drug addiction, or let's just say addiction. I'm not going to call it drug addiction. I'm going to call it addiction. Why? Because the drugs are a key symptom of the addiction. Let me drink some of my tea right here. All right, so moving on. The person is living in a darkness. Now let me say this too. At some point, certain people will choose to stay and live in that darkness because there's some other components that a person can be manipulated by, even if it's self-manipulation or manipulation from another person, and that's shame and guilt. Shame and guilt is so powerful, and these are spells. So you got your curse, that's what you live in, then you got the spells that keep you up under the curse, right? So shame and guilt, a person will try to make you feel shameful about something you could have actually done. And they will cause you, and they'll bring up, well, I tell everybody, you's a homosexual, you slept with men. Or you's a or you're a lesbian in the closet gay. Try to hold that against you. Or you stole something out of Big Mama's purse. Whatever it is. Yeah. So through shame and guilt, they will actually make an attempt to hold somebody hostage. Through their what? Through their emotions, through their intellect. So that's one form. Now, there's another one where an individual will actually choose it. They'll choose. Yeah, I know. I know I got a drug problem. You know, I got a gambling problem. I got a drinking problem. But what they're doing is they're pointing at the symptom because they don't want to deal with the reality of the trauma. Because that trauma could hurt so bad, and it does, on all 4 levels, that sometimes people, man, they don't want to look at that. They don't want to look at that trauma. I'm going over to camera 3 now. And so what happens is that the individual, they will succumb and choose to stay where? Into darkness. And they may have become so comfortable with the behavior that they, with their lifestyle. Because remember, alcoholism and addiction are lifestyles. And they could be so comfortable. And they've actually accepted to a certain level, and I will say a certain level, that they don't mind living in this darkness. Yeah. And it's like living in like a dope house or living in a back alley. Some people addicted to living in dope houses and back alleys and that particular type of lifestyle. They've been beaten. And they somehow convinced themselves. And remember when I talked about emotionally, and I said, inside the emotional is the devotion. They've devoted themselves. Now that don't mean emotion doesn't have several other definitions, but I'm talking about in this case. They have devoted themselves emotionally. That if they should come out, they're going to grieve. They're going to experience some type of grief. And that's a part of the spell that they're under. Yeah. So let's move on. See, because sometimes, man, when we talk about curses and we talk about spells, a lot of times people think about Harry Potter, or stuff like that. No, spells are real. They're very real. And I give a good example of a good curse and a good spell. A good curse is the nigger word. But something, I don't like being called nigger because I know what that represents and I know what it means. And some people say, they can throw up the argument like, oh, well, it's used for what they call that word. It's debonaering or something like that. What is it? A nigga, we use it in this form. No, a nigger, and nigger, Nigger, and Nigga will always mean the same thing because it means what it's created for, just like doodle, feces. You can call it feces, but it's gonna be shit at the end of the day, no matter how you dress it up. You can call it feces, you can call it doodle, you can call it shit, but it's gonna be the same way. And there's no way you can use it as a term of what? Endearment. Now, thug. Like thug is actually a curse. It's an Indian word from the continent of India. And it means a bad, very bad thing. And ain't no way you're gonna take that word and have it mean something else. And I'll see if I can pull it up right quick. Let me take a second. THUG. And let's hit search and see what it means. Thug. Thug. A violent, lawless, or vicious person, especially one who commits a crime such as assault, robbery, and murder. And people glamorize being a thug. You glamorize being violent, lawless, and vicious person. I'm a thug. What's up, thug? Man, ain't no way that I could ever see that as a term of endearment. Not me. Yeah, a violent person is always going to be, what, a violent person. So anyway, moving on. Moving on. So what does it take for a person to come out of the addiction or the alcoholism? What does it take? Well, I'm going to say this right. Let me switch my camera around. What it's going to take is the individual has to have a small amount, a tiny, eeny, beeny, chinchy bit of willingness. They have to have some willingness on their own to come out of the addiction. And I said to come out of addiction. And how that will be manifest is when they put their primary symptom down. And I don't mean for a day. Now, you know, I ain't drank in a week. Or I ain't smoked in 2 weeks. It's going to have to be at least 3 months. At least 3 months. They're going to have to be clean for 3 months. In other words, after 3 months, they could talk about something else. Yeah, it's going to have to take them 3 months to put the primary symptom down. And sometimes, and in most cases, a person is going to have to hit a bottom. So let's move into that. And it says, and I, did my homework a little bit. And so the question is, what does hitting bottom or hitting rock bottom mean? Hitting bottom is a figurative term that implies an individual must reach a point or at some point during their active addiction or alcoholism that is manifested through the 3 obvious symptoms or physical symptoms: alcohol, drug use, or promiscuous sex, or whatever their symptom is, right? Prostitution, selling dope, games of chance, overeating, binging and purging, the lifestyle of addiction or alcoholic. It says, to the above symptoms, to include selling, distribution, although bottoms are different and varies from person to person depending on the individual's tolerance for pain. So let me go over this here, and I'm gonna kind of read this a little bit. It says, what does hitting bottom or rock bottom mean? Hitting bottom is a figurative term that implies an individual must reach a point or at some point during their active addiction or active use of alcoholism, and it's manifested through their most obvious physical symptoms. And then, drug use, alcohol use, promiscuous sexual behavior, to include prostitution, male or female, gambling, games of chance, overeating, binging and purging, addiction to the lifestyle or living in the lifestyle that's directly connected to the above symptoms, to include selling and distribution of alcohol and drugs. Now, what it's saying, when it says, although bottoms are different and varies from person to person, it would depend on the individual's tolerance for pain, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. That would change a person's mind. Hitting bottom can also be applied to addictive behavior. So it's two types of bottom. It's a bottom to the most obvious symptom, and then it's also a bottom to the behavior. And that's why when I was talking about earlier, I was saying that the individual has to become clean from their most obvious symptom for at least 3 months, and that's because at some point they would have to make a decision to what? To recover. And that's a whole different ball game from the obvious symptom. Because inside the obvious symptom, what you're going to find out is after they got clean, the next challenge is facing that trauma. Facing the trauma which put their lives in a tailspin that activated or that really caused that really, I ain't gonna say caused their using. I ain't gonna blame it on that. But actually, they made the decision to pick up whatever it is that they picked up. Sobriety happens the same way. Sobriety happens is when the individual hits bottom, and opening is made on all three levels. The individual is in more of a state of denial, and we're going to talk about denial. Because what happens with denial is denial is connected to the emotional part. The thought of actually leaving that symptom alone, a person will go from the emotional part to the mental part, to the mind, to the intellectual, to the intellect, where they will start thinking of reasons why they should keep doing what they doing. Fact. That's what happened. And when I talked about earlier about denial being a system, because inside the brain here, inside this brain, that's where they will come up with all different types of self-deceptive lies to keep on doing, to keep using whatever it is they were using. That's right. And that's a fact. So a person has to have their denial broke. Now how is, I can't say how, because it's going to be different for each person. But I will say this. If the experience is not just as powerful or more than the trauma was, than the experience of the trauma that planted the seeds for their addiction, for their alcohol, if that experience is not as strong or stronger, then that person is going to relapse. That's what I believe. I believe that from 34 years of being around. I don't care what book you go. I don't care what your sponsor tell you, what anybody else ever tell you. That's my experience. And one of my friends termed it as an ass whooping. What you experience is going to have to be just as great. In other words, even the thought of picking up a drug. And then I'm going to talk about the next part. I'm going to bring this in. even if the drug is or the primary symptom is putting down, and you dealing with behavior, and let's say prostitution, or you dealing with gambling, and remember when I talked about let me go back to the obsession. Excuse me, compulsion. And then remembering compulsion, it said a fixed idea that takes us time and time again to our particular drug or some substitute. Well, that substitute. So let's say your drugs and your alcohol is gone, but you done substituted with the behavior. In order to hit a bottom, the experience has to be what's that law? It has to be a equal opposite reaction to what happened inside your trauma. Yeah, because if it's not, denial's gonna set back in. You're gonna go back up in here into the intellect, and you're gonna rationalize why you should pick that stuff up again, or why you should continue the behavior that you're doing. And that's for real. Listen to people that relapse on alcohol, on drugs, and listen to what they came up with a reason. It was a reason. And I'm going to tell you, like anybody will tell you in any fellowship, it ain't no reason. You wanted to. You wanted to pick that stuff up. You wanted to do it again. You wanted to keep practicing that behavior. Yeah. So that's why I say that the experience must be equal to or greater. And I'll go on to say greater. But the reason why I say equal to, because it'll be dependent on the individual. Like I said, for a bottom, some people might just get a traffic ticket. So, I ain't doing that no more. Some people might have to lose their license and then get them back again. Some people might have to lose a limb or a life through a car accident before they realize they shouldn't run a red light. And that's just the way it is. Because there's two things that we have that's going to sow the seeds of a relapse. And that's your emotional and your mental state, your intellect and your devotional. That's two things you got going against you. Dealing with alcoholism and addiction. And that's why when you hit bottom, like some people say, well, they got a trap door. Ain't no fucking trap door. Sorry about that. Ain't no trap door. Nah. You didn't have the right experience. You didn't have that right experience. You didn't have the experience that maintain your willingness. I'm going to say this, right? After being, and this is my experience, mine, after being clean and sober for 34 years and 5 months, I guess, and some change, my experience is through my own experience. I didn't experience divorce. I didn't experience the death of loved ones. I didn't experience pennilessness. I didn't experience homelessness with me and my child. I didn't experience I didn't experience a lot of stuff. And to me, death is death. My stepfather, love that man, Jimmy Dog, love him. My Uncle Gun, my Uncle George. People don't think we was close. Me and George was cool. My brother Roland, yeah, and that was my motherfucking brother. I don't care what y'all say. And if you say it the wrong way in my face, it might be some. Don't do it. That was my man. So anyway, I ain't pick up. Cried like a baby on all of them. but I ain't pick up. Because the experience of picking up, my last experience was picking up was so greater than all that. I ain't doing that. Now I relapsed on some behavior, tricking. Like them girls. I relapsed on some of that. I relapsed on cussing and stealing. Yeah, because I like to, you know, I ain't even, that's a whole nother video, stealing. But anyway, moving on, because I've been doing this like for an hour and 20 minutes, and I'm worked through this. And if y'all want to watch the whole thing, fine. If not, I got to get this up off me. So anyway, so inside the hitting of the bottom, whether it's for the drug or whether it's for your behavior that's after you got clean, and you need to hit a bottom on some behavior. If that bottom is not greater, if the experience through, all right, they threw me off. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna cut it off right here, and I'm gonna pick it up later on. So I can see me still streaming on my dial. I'm gonna stop at, in case I am, hitting bottom. I'm gonna pick up hitting bottom tomorrow. My, what? Oh, I got thrown off of YouTube. That's what it is. So anyway, I'm gonna talk with y'all later. I'm gonna stop it right here and I'm gonna pick it up later on. All right, thank you. Stop streaming.